Staying Alive UK. Share your story.
Hello and welcome to the Share Your Story podcast series, a business biography, their story so far. My name is Michael de Groot and I am Chief Storyteller at Staying Alive UK. My purpose through this podcast series is to allow my guests, through their stories, inspire you to take the first step towards your new business venture, or maybe if you are already in business, develop your existing business even further. Thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you have a massive choice in which podcasts you listen to. I'm delighted to have on the podcast today Carmen Capuano. And as always, I will tell you a little bit about Carmen before we get started. Carmen was born in 1966 in Govan, Glasgow, and is of Italian and Spanish descent. She left her native Scotland at the age of 18 to seek her fortune in London. A full and varied career saw her tread the boards as a musical theatre performer before undertaking such diverse jobs as a primary school teacher and veterinary assistant in Birmingham. She now lives in the small Worcestershire town of Bromsgrove. Interested in writing from an early age, it was only when she had her own children that she found her enthusiasm for storytelling had not waned in any way and was still alive and enticing as ever. She says, "For me, writing is as essential to the soul as breathing is to the body." Welcome to the Share Your Story podcast, Carmen. How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Great, Carmen. Really lovely to hear your voice. And it's been some years since we met in person. And I promised you that I was going to start a podcast, and it got delayed for various different reasons. And I came across your name or your business card, and I went, I must get in touch with Carmen to see if she'd be willing to come on the podcast. So I'm really delighted you accepted. So thank you so much. And usually how we start things off is to know a little bit about yourself, a bit about your personal life. So where you were born, a bit about your education, where you now live, about your family, if you wish to share anything, and any hobbies and interests. So just so that people that are listening get a picture about Carmen and the person behind the author. So over to you.
Hi. I was actually born in a place called Govan in Glasgow. For those of you who don't know it, it used to be Gorbals. People used to say Gorbals was the worst place in Glasgow to be, the worst place to live, the worst place to pass through, and you definitely didn't want to go there. By the time I was born, that was actually Govan. Govan was the worst place. So I've come from the worst.
Oh my God!
I wouldn't say I'm now living in the best, but Bromsgrove is a far cry from where I was born. I've kind of pulled myself up, really. Not that that's anything bad about Govan, but I'm sure it's lovely nowadays, but it wasn't back then.
Oh, wow. And so when did you move away from there? And you've got an interesting background as well because of your name.
Yeah, I'm half Italian and I guess a quarter Spanish. My father was Italian and my maternal grandfather was Spanish. So I'm very sort of Mediterranean. You wouldn't know it to look at me, to be honest. I'm blue-eyed, blonde-haired, very fair-skinned. Don't look anything like what you'd expect, a sort of Italian stroke Spanish crossbreed hybrid person to look like. But perhaps that was a Scottish influence, I don't know. But I moved away from Scotland when I was 18. We'd been in Govan for some time and we moved actually to the north side of Glasgow to Postle Park when I was about 6, I think. It was equally as bad as Govan.
Okay.
But in a very sort of different way. And I don't know if you know, but Glasgow in those days was very much like Ireland, very sectarian, very Protestants versus Catholics and, big fights and all that.
Wow.
And I got a little bit sort of caught up in that as a child. partly because of my heritage and partly the fact that we'd moved from one, almost very specific area in Glasgow to another one. So that was an interesting time, shall we say. And I guess it's what's made me the person I am today. Weird.
Interesting, I would call it, not weird.
Well, interesting in a weird sort of way, perhaps.
Oh, and was it because you were Italian? Were you kind of Catholic then, or?
Yeah, I was raised very much as a Catholic, although I had a Protestant mother. And, in those days, it wasn't really the done thing, to be honest, to have marriages across the two religious divides. But people did. Not very often, and not very many people. And actually, my mother's marriage didn't survive, not because of Catholicism or Protestantism, but literally just because it didn't survive. And so when we moved, I was initially put into a Catholic school and then changed over into a Protestant school with very interesting results.
Yeah.
To this day, I have Facebook friends who are from the Catholic school and from the Protestant school, but you still generally find the two don't mix, to be perfectly honest.
Wow.
So I'm kind of a foot in both camp person, really, which is unusual.
Wow, so fascinating, because I can totally relate to that in a strange way, but because originally I'm from Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and my father was Dutch, and my mother was Anglo-Indian.
Oh, right.
And she was Hindu-ish, although she had a very English upbringing, so I don't know whether she really practiced it that much. But when she married my father, she converted to the Catholic faith. So we went to Catholic school, very Catholic upbringing. And I used to go as a altar boy. I will never forget this, like 5:30 in the morning or something. I had to be an altar boy, a very early morning mass. It was one of the worst days of the week that I had to go to church with my mother, and no one else did except me. I don't know. I was
so much for Sunday being the day of rest then, isn't it?
Oh, well, no, this was on a Friday. Yeah, this was on a Friday morning, very early hours. It was mad. Anyway, but yeah, so I'd never noticed the kind of Catholic versus Protestant thing. But obviously it must have existed, but I just wasn't conscious of it at the time. Yeah. But yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? All these different things, and we're all the same people at the end of the day.
I'm afraid it's something, I mean, you look at the terrorist attacks that are going on at the moment, religion will not go away, and people will always use it against each other. And it's sad, but that is the case. Very sad, very sad. Okay, so let's keep upbeat. So what happened then, when you moved, I've already read out that you went to London. I did, yes. When I was at school in Glasgow, I went to a normal comprehensive school, but I also went to drama school. And I got this mad idea in my head. I was going to act and sing and dance. Now, trust me, I cannot dance for the life of me, but I can act and I can sing. And it all goes hand in hand. So I went down to London, and I did actually do a few plays down there in the West End, but nothing major, nothing big enough. And I promised myself that I didn't want to waste my life away, because, to be honest, it's one of those vocations that people do. They either make it big or they waste their entire life doing tiny little bit parts, excuse me, that will never get them anywhere. Yeah. And so I didn't want to do that. I gave myself a certain amount of time, 18 months, and I thought, if I haven't made it big in that time, I will do something else. So I came up to Birmingham, and at that point, and I did a few various jobs while I thought about what it was I was going to do. I went to university and got a degree in education, and I then became a teacher for a little while, got married, and then decided that actually it wasn't going to be the best career to raise a family. And strange as that may seem, because of all the various holidays that teachers have, but you do bring an awful lot of work home. And I wanted to change my way of living. So I went into commercial jobs. I took a job as an executive manager in British Gas. And by the time I'd had my first child, things were kind of different for me, and I didn't want to go back full time. I wanted to look after my child at home by myself. And so that was what I did. But having always worked and always had this drive and this enthusiasm and this desire to do something, to leave some sort of legacy, to leave something that I could look back on and go, okay, great, look what I did. And having children is part of that, that we all do that. We all go, look what a beautiful human being we've created. But I wanted more than that. And so I actually started to tell my son a story at night that I'd made up myself.
Yeah.
And this story went on, and it went on, and it went on over several nights and into several weeks. And I started to think, this is a really long story. I didn't anticipate going into it in this sort of depth or level. And then I thought, well, maybe there's something in this. Maybe I should write it down. So I started to write the story down, and it actually became my first book. It became The Owner's Volume 1 Alone. Received a lot of critical acclaim. People really liked it. A lot of people didn't, I guess, get it because it's science fiction, and it's a slightly different perspective on science fiction. It's not laser beams at sunset and beam me up, Scotty. It's not a space opera. It's actually almost a very epic family story, tragedy in some ways. It's this epic tale, and it spans 10 books.
Wow. So when I'm curious, when you were reading out the story to your son, had you written stuff down, or were you just making it up in your head?
Yeah, I was literally making it up as I went along. And I found that it's almost like I fell into becoming an author, because it certainly wasn't the plan.
No.
But having started to write it down, I found that the story evolved in the same way as the oral storytelling had done. The characters came more to life. Things happened that I hadn't anticipated in the story, and that certainly I hadn't planned for. And it took a different direction. It became almost an organic process. It just sort of took life and went off on its own track.
Wow, that's fascinating. So literally you started making stuff up in the story for your son, and then realized there was more coming out. And it was ongoing when you then realized I must write some of this down.
Yeah. I mean, I was probably quite far into the story by the time I decided to write it down. So I did have to then backtrack and, actually put the words down that I'd already, committed into my son's memory. And I think I've brainwashed him with it, to be honest, because he is an avid fan of all my writing now. He's read everything I've written.
Oh, my God. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
There's one thing, because as you know, I'm passionate about storytelling, but more in the business world rather than the, fictional world, I guess. But one thing I always say to people is that everybody loves stories, right? We love stories from when we're really, really young, when our parents told us stories. And that's how we start to develop a love for stories, because children love hearing stories. And the thing is as well, we have to create all the images in our brain when stories are being told to us. So when we were little, we had to create the pictures in our brain of the characters or the events, the things, the places, etc. Because there weren't any photographs to show us what it looked like. We had to create those in our brain. And that's why storytelling, I believe, I don't know what your view is, I believe is so much part of the human psyche, because we start at such a young age.
It is, and it's also how we make sense of the world around us, and we learn from the examples of characters. We learn what's good behaviour and what works for people, what will get you ahead in life and what doesn't. So we get our morals, we get our virtues, we get our whole sense of identity from stories, and they are so important. And I think nowadays, they're more important than ever, quite frankly, because kids are so wrapped up, or some kids, I should say, are so wrapped up in computer games and video technology that, they get the images, they are given the images. Their brain doesn't have to function and work in the same way, as you've just said, to actually imagine what those characters are like, what they look like, what they sound like, what they might smell like. And that's what reading and writing a book gives you. It gives you that ability to visualize something that isn't actually given to you as a particular image. And I think more than that, as I said to you before, we do learn so much from books, but we get cultural ideas from books, from other cultures and other ideas and things that we could never possibly actually realize and see and develop and feel in real life. There are places that we can go to in books that we couldn't afford to go to in person, or perhaps futuristic that we'll never be able to because of time constraints and, physical dimensions and things. So there are other worlds that we can visit, and there are things that we can explore that we have no ability to explore in any other way.
I love that. I could talk about this for hours because it's such an interesting topic for me now as I've been doing more and more research on the whole subject. Because one thing that lots of people in this modern world of technology and personal branding and digital social media, people don't realize that if you want to get noticed, you need to stand out from the crowd. You need to actually share your story. And this is one of the reasons why I started this podcast. Not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons. Because that's actually the most interesting thing about people. It's their own personal story. Okay. Fascinating, Carmen. So you mentioned this book series that happened. You said 10 books.
That's right, yes.
And is that story now stopped, or did it end, or are there more books on the way for that?
Well, it's sort of at two different stages. I wrote books 1 and 2 and then self-published them. I basically put them forward to publishers and, the big publishers. At the time you could submit to them, you can't anymore. And I got back from Random House, we think your characters are great, we think your writing is great, we think the stories are great. However, it doesn't fit into our publishing lists at this moment in time. So we suggest you go to a smaller publisher or publish it yourself or whatever. And I went down the route of self-publishing at that point because I thought, the story does need to be told. Meanwhile, I took a shower, obviously quite a few showers, but one in particular. And a character called Natalie popped into my head and said, it was almost as if she was there with me in the shower, which, I'm not mad. I don't have any sort of psychosis or anything like that. However, that is sometimes how the characters appear to me. They appear as almost very real, very tangible people. Yeah. And she said, I've got this terrible, terrible thing has happened to me, and I don't know what to do, and I actually don't know how this is going to turn out, but you've got to help me. You've got to write my story down. And Natalie became the main character in Split Decision, a very, very powerful, gripping book. And it's about, obviously, Natalie, who is 15 years old. She's on the cusp of becoming 16. She will literally have her 16th birthday that weekend, the following weekend, if she ever gets to it. And she goes out with a friend. They go shopping, as girls do, and they look at nail varnish, and she buys some shoes, and they have a very sort of ordinary day. But what does happen is that she meets these two young men, both of whom she knows. One is the boy, more or less the boy next door. He actually lives around the corner, and she's known him virtually all of her life. He's been one of her best friends, but he's been gone for a while. He's been at a different school. His parents moved away for a short time, and they're back in the area. The other boy is a little bit of a dark horse, a little bit of a bad, sultry boy, He's got all the looks going for him. Well, actually, both boys do, but he's got that sort of mysterious edge, that sort of sexy thing that's going on. And they both ask her out. And being a young girl, she gets a bit sort of flabbergasted, and she says yes to both of them at different points in the day. And later on, she realizes that it's the same night they're on about. She can only go out with one of them, and she's going to have to make a decision. And at that point, the story splits. The two chapters alternate all the way through the book from then on in with two separate storylines.
Right.
And it's very much like, I don't know if you ever saw the film Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow back in the 80s.
I might have done, yeah.
Yeah, it takes that sort of stand. So basically, it follows the two dates in alternate chapters, and you see her having this absolutely wonderful first date, and she falls a little bit in love, and she has her first kiss. But on the other timeline, which is her alternate reality, she has an absolutely dreadful time, and in fact, a very, very dark and dangerous time. And these two chapters crisscross and interlace with one another, very woven together through the fabric of the book. And it's only towards the end that you realise which was the actual real timeline, and in fact, which boy was on which date, because all the way through, their identities are hidden, so you don't know which one she chose.
Right.
So at that point, after I'd written that book, I thought this is a very commercially viable book. And I then approached publishers and did get a publishing deal for that book. And that came out with a publisher. I then went back to the Owners series and wrote the next 2 volumes, which I then put out to the public. Wrote another very commercially viable book called Ascension, which I went with publishers again, traditional publishers. And I've now written up to volume 7 of The Owners. So there's still volumes 8, 9 and 10, which will be written over the next 18 months to do.
Yeah.
But I've only put out up to volume 4. I'm kind of trying to stagger my work so that people don't go, okay, she's just science fiction, because I'm not. I'm science fiction, I'm dystopian, I write thrillers, chick lit, children's books, all sorts of novels and different things. And in fact, I've actually just completed a series of cartoons, which I'm working with an animation company on, and hopefully may well be sold to the BBC. So that's another string to my bow, if you like.
Wow, fabulous. Well, it sounds like you've got a real plan together there. And how did that plan come about? I mean, you know, when you started going down this journey of becoming an author, did you go and get some training on how to do this, or did you just make it up?
I did. Because of the way the characters come to me, what actually happens is that, and it may sound crazy, but I open up, you know, whether it's a new document on Word or whether it's an existing book I started, and I literally open it up, sit with my fingers poised, and I write. I don't plan it. It literally, I'm almost like a conduit for the story. The story downloads in me section by section as I need to do it. So whilst I'm always aware of the overall structure of the story and vaguely how it will go towards the end, I don't actually know the detail. And there was a funny time in one of the books where, this is one of the Owners' books, where someone does something, it's more or less akin to genocide, basically. And it's such a terrible, terrible, terrible thing to happen. And all the way through, I'm writing it, I'm thinking, okay, that this is happening. Who is perpetrating this terrible crime? And it's only when I got to a bit where they're actually in a barn and they lift a lantern up and the person is revealed. And I actually had this huge intake of breath. I actually went, and I thought, never, it's never that character. And it was. And I was absolutely shocked, totally thrown. I didn't know who it was going to be. You know, and I knew that whoever it was cloaking themselves in, you know, the good deeds that they were doing. And everybody in the book, all the characters seemed to have a little bit of mystery, a little bit of a hard edge somewhere in their background. And I kind of had ideas it might have been this guy or this woman or, you know, somebody else. But when it was revealed who was actually doing it, I was totally blown away. No idea.
That's incredible. That's totally incredible. And I mean, nobody would suggest, because hopefully there are kind of business people listening to this, you know, that are making their mind up whether they get out of their job and start their own business. That's one of the other reasons I get people to listen to this. But nobody is going to suggest, right, well, just when you want to start your business, just sit there with your fingers poised at the keyboard and just wait for something to appear.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I totally concur with you that actually sometimes it does happen that way, because even business ideas, I mean, we only have to go back to talk about Einstein, right? His stuff came to him in dreams, in contemplating something. It didn't come because he planned it. You know, some of his best stuff came because he thought about it or waited for those thoughts to come into his head. So on the one hand, you know, we've got this rational side of ourselves that we need to be planning. And, you know, I know people that say, oh, you've got to, you know, I put a thing on LinkedIn saying, everyone has a book in them. If you were to start writing your book today, what title would it have, right? As a kind of open question. And then a very good friend who I've known for years, although we don't see each other that often, who's actually an author herself, and she coaches people how to write books. And she said, well, you can't start with the title, really. Sometimes the title is not the right thing to start with. Yeah. You've got to wait for the title. Perhaps the title comes at the end. And it was very much around, you know, you need to plan this in a better way. So what's your view on that in terms of planning, you know?
Yeah, I always start off with a working title. So I'll have something in my head. But it does often change. Not always, but it often changes. I've written a story. I haven't published it yet, but called I'm trying to think now what it was called, The Boy Who Rescues Pigeons. And for a long time, because the main character's name is Lucas Reverential Pertwee, which is a bit of a weird name, but a bit of a strange boy, I toyed with the idea of the peculiar problems of Lucas Reverential Pertwee. And I kind of had that as my alternative title. But in the end, I did go with The Boy Who Rescues Pigeons, because really that is what it was about. It wasn't about the peculiarness of Lucas. It was about the fact that he rescued pigeons. So sometimes, yeah, you do have to play about with it. And I think everybody needs a start. I mean, there is that famous line from the film with, I think it was Kevin Costner, of The Field of Dreams. Say, if you build it, they will come, you know? So I think there's an element of that you do have to put something out there so that you can make a start. We all need to make a start somehow. And it's whatever best suits you to make that start, really. If that's a title, great. If it's the first line, if it's the germ of an idea, whatever it is, you know, as long as you can get that thing to make that start, that's what you should do.
Brilliant. Love it. So, you know, there are different trains of thought in terms of whether you can be successful as an author these days, because it's a tough business, you know, getting published. There are lots of people publishing their own books. There is, in the business world, and I'm talking about small business people, you know, people that are coaches or consultants or whatever, you know, they write their own book and it becomes almost their business card. You know, I'm a published author. I mean, that book might not be a success at all, but it's a case of, I'm a published author now, you know, do you want to buy my book? Oh gosh, you know, he's got a book, you know, everybody needs his book. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right to a degree with that everybody has a book in them, but actually in reality, probably everybody doesn't have an interesting book in them. They may have a book. Is it interesting? Business books tend to be, not all of them, but certainly some of them are self-published. And I don't want to run self-published things down, because I have self-published myself. Yeah. I think there is this perceived notion that people who self-publish don't necessarily do a particularly good job. Now, when I self-publish, I actually went, because I'm not technologically minded at all. I mean, I can just about barely switch on the computer. That's the total limit of my technical skills. So I went to a company and said, look, I've written this manuscript. Can you please put it into a book format, add a cover, etc., 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 because I couldn't do it. I mean, the typeface would be all over the place if I did that. Sure. But there are people who insist on doing that for themselves, and I think that's a mistake. Unless you are really conversant with your way around computers and actually dealing with the fabric of making it into a book that looks like a proper book, I wouldn't go there. No. I really would. I like the validity that having a traditional publisher gives you. I mean, I've got 2 traditional publishers for 2 very, very different books, different genres and everything. And I like the fact that I can say, look, this isn't just me that's saying this is a good book. These people have invested money in my book. They're also saying it's a good book. You should buy it. But I think what happens is that when people self-publish, and obviously there's a plethora of books out there now. I mean, there are literally billions of books on Amazon, and it makes it very hard for people to root through it.
Yeah.
What happens too is that it undervalues things, it devalues the whole idea of it. So you end up with people selling their books for 99 pence, or in fact, not even selling them, but putting them on sites that give them away for free.
Yeah.
Now, personally, I don't understand why you do that. I don't understand why you'd spend however long it's taking you to craft a book and then put it out there for free. Because what you've actually done is totally devalue your work and made it almost disposable. I want people to come back to my books and say, do you know what, I've read that, but in a year's time, I'm going to read it again, because there's another, it's like an onion, there's another layer of meaning there. There's something else I can still withdraw from that story because it is that good. And that's what I've tried to do with all my books. It's not just a simple tale. There's all these underlying subplots and structures, because as human beings, and characters are the same, we're complex. You don't get anyone who's, wonderfully good. Maybe Mother Teresa, but short of Mother Teresa or Gandhi, nobody's good through and through. Nobody's bad through and through. We all have these different layers. And I think that if you don't have that in your book, if your characters don't have that, it will be so one-dimensional that people will literally pick it up, maybe read it, maybe not, and they will discard it. And so I think that really, if you're going to write a book, it is worth investing in it and doing it properly. If you can go down the traditional publisher route, if you can get a traditional publisher, that is the best way.
Yeah.
Your book will be edited. You will have someone else's eyes and heart invested in it. And they will say, look, there is a section here on page 22 or whatever that it's not quite working. Can we just tweak that bit? But if you self-publish and if nobody else looks at your book like that, you stand the risk of losing your reader, in all honesty, at some within the book.
And then if you're going to write another one, it's unlikely, if they haven't enjoyed it or they found it a tough read, it's unlikely they're going to buy your second book or your third book or whatever, because
so even with traditional self-publishing, which I've got, it's a hard slog to people to follow you because there are so many other people out there.
Yeah. Well, that's really fabulous advice, because I'm sure there are many people listening to this podcast who might be authors, or aspiring authors, I should say, rather than aspiring business owners. They may see that they have a calling, but they haven't been able to, go down the route of getting it published and how the journey is of doing that. So coming back to you, and thank you for that advice, very, very useful. How has it been for you in, being motivated to keep writing, and what, apart from kind of joy of writing these stories, what about the business side of things and is it a worthwhile thing for you to be doing in terms of having an income and having a life from it?
Yeah, in all honesty, unless you're J.K. Rowling, I don't think it's very hard to make a living as a writer. Different people have different deals, but the average you will get is 10% royalty, 10 to maybe 15% if you're very lucky, on books. And so you're looking at, depending upon how your books are priced, you're looking at something between maybe 40 to 70 pence per book. Right, which isn't an awful lot of money. From that, if you have an agent, I've got an agent, you then have to pay them 10 to 15% of your earnings. So obviously that brings your earnings down.
Yeah.
You are not selling hundreds of thousands of books. Forget it, really, to be honest, because you will never be. But probably you could sell 2 books and maybe 3 or 4, and you might be able to manage to buy a bag of chips, quite frankly. So unless you're going to feed your kids on beans and toast for the rest of your life, it probably isn't a good vocation to pursue. There's not a lot of money in it unless you sell lots and lots and lots of books. Most people will not sell lots and lots and lots of books. That's the sad reality.
Yeah. Partly
because the market is saturated with authors, and partly because the way things are set up, it's very hard for authors to actually make money. As I've said before, there are a lot of sites who, they're not happy to have your book on at a reasonable price. They want it on at 99 pence or 99 or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's a very, very tough business to make money in. Very tough. So if you're in it for the money, I would say get out of it, quite frankly, unless you're exceptionally lucky. I think, I don't know if you were ever a fan of the Del Boy syndrome, yes. The only fools and horses.
Of course, yes.
His famous line is, this time next year, Rodney, we'll be millionaires. And I think, I personally blame J.K. Rowling for this, right? Because she did that. She did, the Del Trotter thing. She wrote a book. She became more or less a multi-billionaire overnight. And everybody went, oh, right, okay, so that's the thing to do. I need to write a book. I'm going to become a billionaire. You are not. I'm very lucky in the fact that ideas come very easily to me for books, and I write very rapidly. I write on average about 3 books a year.
Wow.
And I'm quite prolific. But saying that is what I do. That is my job. So therefore, I've got all day to do it in the same way people go out to work and do whatever they do. However, I'm not yet at the stage where I can afford my first yacht, unfortunately. So if anybody wants to go out there and bulk buy my books and, sell them or distribute them to their friends and neighbours, you go ahead, you be my guest, you're more than welcome to do so. But yeah, it's a tough job.
So are you supplementing your income in other ways?
Well, up till quite recently, I was working for a magazine. I worked as copy editor for a magazine. I also did all the social media and a few other bits and pieces, and that was that was income. But again, that's not something that I'm going to get rich from.
No.
I'm lucky to be in the position where I am at the moment, where actually things are okay and I can afford to keep writing. Whether that would be the case in, I don't know, 5 years or 10 years is anybody's guess, quite frankly, because obviously things and circumstances change in life.
Yes.
But as it stands at this moment in time, I'm doing okay, thanks.
Oh, brilliant. Well, it's so fascinating to hear the journey of an author and how that, has developed for you and how, it's continuing as well. And it's such a fascinating topic, to learn more about how an author is doing with their journey in writing, etc. So, okay, so we're nearly coming to the end. So I have a couple of questions left. And the first question is, do you have a bit of a vision? And I know you just said you don't know how things are going to turn out, but do you have a vision, or are you for how your writing may evolve over the future, or are you just allowing it to naturally evolve?
Well, I'm probably letting the writing naturally evolve, and from the reviews that I've had, there's not many on Amazon, probably because people are very hesitant. I don't know why, but people are very hesitant about putting reviews on there. And they'll sometimes email me and they'll say, read your book. Oh, absolutely loved it. Can't wait for the next book. And I'll say, well, okay, that's fabulous. But don't tell me, can you put it on Amazon? And they'll say, oh, well, but I don't know what to say. I'll say, well, just say what you've told me.
Yeah.
But they're very hesitant about doing it. So I have on my blog an actual entire page that's devoted to reviews where people have emailed me and said, but they haven't necessarily put it on Amazon. And sometimes it's just because they've bought the books actually from me in person during a talk or an event. And so they'll naturally come back to me rather than going to Amazon.
Yeah.
So that's always there. So the writing will evolve. I'm quite happy that will continue to evolve. From a business perspective, with regard to the writing, I think I probably need to look for larger publishers who have more clout behind them and who can actually get my story more out there. Because the trouble is, as you know, we've already discussed, once it's on Amazon and you've got reviews, but you know it's there, it's kind of left to its own devices with a smaller publisher, because they've moved on to publishing the next book. Whereas with a larger publisher, they're still pumping out resources. They're still saying, hey, everybody, have you seen this great book? You know, come and get it. And they're pushing it at stores. They're writing adverts for it. It's more on social media. There's a lot more oomph and thrust behind it than you get, unfortunately, with a smaller publisher. So what I'm trying to do is sort of work my way up the lines. I don't know if I'm happy about the idea of going with one of the very big, you know, major publishers, because what they have a tendency to do, and I have friends who've published with them, is they'll say, yeah, we liked your story and we liked the characters. However, we don't like this one character. Can you take that character out and can you put in this other character? Oh, and we don't like this scene. Can you just change that? Oh, and there's a bit in the middle where we don't like this, that, and the next thing. And what you find is that sometimes you look back at it and you say, well, what was it they actually liked about the story in the first place? Because they've changed everything.
Yeah.
I've been very lucky with the two traditional publishers I have. Both of them have independently said, your stories are great, the characters are great, you're a very strong writer, and actually there isn't anything that we need to change. What we may need to do is, I've got a terrible, when I type, my typos are just dreadful, and I cannot type the word into. For some reason, it's beyond me. So every time I type into, it comes out as inot, every single time. So obviously I do spell check, but there's a couple of things that you miss. And there's a few times when you get carried away, and because I'm typing so rapidly, because my brain's working so rapidly, and downloading so rapidly because of the way I write, I might miss out a full stop, or I might miss out the odd and or the odd word in there. So they'll say, oh, you missed a word there, or there's a full stop missing there, or there's a capital letter missing there. And they will tidy up for me like that. And obviously they will format it into proper book form. Yeah. But in terms of changing the storyline, they've never done that. I think the only thing that was once said to me was with Split Decision, my publisher said, I think because it's such a raw, gritty book, you maybe have to tone it down just a little, because your writing is so pure and it's so clear and it's so, you know, it really draws the reader in as if they're feeling everything as if they are actually that character. That actually, one particular scene, she said, it's too harrowing for the reader to read. So we need to tone it down a little bit, she said, because the people that we've sent it out to get opinions on, because obviously publishers do that, have said, this is really harrowing, this is really gritty, and almost reduced me to tears at one point. She said, so we have to tone it down a little bit. And that was the only time I've been, told to change something.
Yeah. And that's surprising, because you want to invoke that emotion in people, because when that happens, they will remember it. And the same happens in films, you know, even documentaries, you know, that moves people to tears. But that's part of what people try to achieve. So interesting. I think for her perspective, this was going out as a young adult book. Young adult crossover. So I've always said, if you're 15 and above, I'm happy for you to read Split Decision. But I'm aware there have been children younger than that. In fact, I had a message from one gentleman who told me his daughter was, you know, totally obsessed by my books, and she'd read everything several times over. And it was when Split Decision had just come out, and he said, I know that you're advocating it's from 15 years up. She's 10, she's about to be 11 within the next week or so. I'm happy for her to read it, but I'd like your advice. And I'd said, well, look, it's very gritty. There's very adult scenes in it. So whilst I wouldn't advocate it, it's your daughter, if you're happy for her to read it. But what I would suggest is that you read it first and check that you're happy with it. And that was the reason, because it has very grown-up scenes in it.
that I would say, 15 and up. But to be honest, nowadays, kids are so advanced and they're seeing things on the TV well after the watershed, and they're very aware of what goes on in real life. But I think you don't want to slap them across the face with it.
No.
So that was the idea, really.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And last couple of questions. First one is, if there was one bit of advice you would give aspiring authors, what advice would that be?
If you have the time and if the money isn't important to you, then just do it. Just go for it. Because at the end of the day, if you do have a good story, then it deserves to be told.
Yeah. Don't keep it inside of you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And then the very last question, Carmen, is how can people get in touch with you? Where can they locate you on social media or your website?
Well, the easiest thing to do is to actually Google me, because I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, Twitter. Obviously, I've got an email address. You can basically contact me in a variety of ways. But if you type my name, which is Carmen Capuano, and it's spelled like Capuano, so that's Capuano. You can find out everything about me on the internet, and I'd love to hear from you.
Fabulous. And there is a form on the blog post on my website as well.
Great.
And so people can fill out the form and it will get emailed to you. If they've got any questions or would like to know more about your books, about your storytelling or anything else indeed they want to find out from you.
That's great.
Carmen, fabulous to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for sharing with us your journey in becoming an author and how you're running your author business. Absolutely fascinating, and I hope it will inspire some authors out there to get started, and indeed some business owners to do it properly too. And I hope we meet in person again really soon.
I'm sure we will. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, Michael, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you.
Thank you, Carmen.
Staying Alive UK. Share your story.